I hope you had a good summer. I know I did. I got to travel a little bit. My wife Alicia, she works on campus. That's exactly how I feel about her too. We went up to San Francisco Bay Area. It's all right. To visit to visit her family. And we went to the Ferry building. We went to a restaurant there, and I was waiting in line for the restaurant with two of her sisters. And as we were waiting, we start to eavesdrop on this conversation happening behind us. There was a man and a woman. They were both well-dressed. And they were standing at this I don't quite know you yet distance, her body facing forward in line, and his body mostly directed towards her. And we begin to realize, this is a first date. This is a Tinder ignited, we've been talking a while, but I don't know you yet, first date. And this guy is trying hard. Way too hard. And she is being so patient and kind and understanding. I'm not going to take you through the whole conversation that I was so privy to hear, but I will say it started with him saying, man, this line is so long. At least there's a view. I'm not kidding. He goes on, like already, that is like B-grade movie, rom-com, should not make the cut. But he goes on to say, I'm not talking about the waterfront. I'm talking about you. You're the view. And my skin is crawling for this woman because that is so painfully awkward, and he just doesn't get it. Fast forward 10 minutes of what I can only imagine is him showing her his selfie collection. She pieces out. She excuses herself to go to the restroom, ducks out of line, and disappears. And I'm not sure if she came back or not. And if you knew the rest of the conversation, it was for her benefit. But why are so many first dates so patently terrible? Communication scholars who study human behavior and our interpersonal connections tell us that when two strangers meet, there's this exchange, this negotiation that happens where we feel each other out and we try to decide if there's some common ground. And we go through a process both actively and interactively of what's called uncertainty reduction. And sometimes uncertainty reduction results in two people finding enough common ground on which to establish a friendship. I think this is what C.S. Lewis was getting at when he said, friendship is born the moment when one says to another, what? You too? I thought that was only me. When the relief of familiarity replaces uncomfortable uncertainty, relationships and connections are established. Other times, though, uncertainty reduction results in one person saying to the other, I am now certain that I do not want to talk to you. Boy, bye. Why do we engage in this ritual dance? To reduce uncertainty? I think it's because it's uncomfortable. We don't like that feeling of being uncertain. We don't like that discomfort, and so we seek to establish some common ground. We seek to establish our comfort. And if you're here at Biola with the new year in front of you, whether you're just arriving or whether you are shipping out soon, uncertainty might be looming on the horizon. And I'm convinced that we experience uncertainty and discomfort so often because it's part of the human experience. And if it's part of the human experience, I think Jesus has something to say about it. So here's what I'm going to propose. First, following Jesus will not keep us from discomfort. In fact, Jesus teaches us to find comfort in the uncomfortable through leading us into displacement. Thank you so much. You'll never experience this if you don't learn to leave behind the crowd, and finally, away from the crowd, you may encounter storms. But in the storms, you'll see God at work. Our text today is Mark 4:35 through 41. It says, "Later that day, when evening came, Jesus said to them, 'Let's cross over to the other side of the lake.' They left the crowd and took him in the boat just as he was. Other boats followed along. Gale force winds arose, and waves crashed against the boat so that the boat was swamped. But Jesus was in the rear of the boat, sleeping on a pillow. They woke him up. 'Teacher, don't you care that we're drowning?' He got up and gave orders to the wind, and he said to the lake, 'Silence, be still.' The wind settled down, and there was a great calm. And Jesus asked them, 'Why were you frightened? Don't you have faith yet?' Overcome with awe, they said to each other, 'Who then is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him.'" Who then is this? This is one of those strange texts that don't let us encounter the divinity of Jesus until we first deal with his humanity. Jesus was asleep. And it was in a moment where the disciples were experiencing one of the great storms of their life. You can hear the fear in their voice. "Teacher, don't you care?" The storm has clearly gone on long enough for them to wonder, why isn't he awake yet? Should we wake him up? Do you think he'll notice if we turn around? Does he love us? Did he plan this? Does he know? "Teacher, don't you care?" And Jesus, sleeping on a pillow. There's this great scene from the old black and white movie Miracle on 34th Street where Kris Kringle's new roommate refuses to turn off the light until he finds out the answer to the age-old question, does Santa Claus sleep with his whiskers tucked into the blanket or not? And the first time I saw that, I thought, I've never wondered that about Santa Claus. I've not wondered that. And I feel that way about this text. Like, I've never considered, how does Jesus sleep when Jesus sleeps, or at least slept when he was here on earth? This, comes with, images of him, curled up, right, in a little ball. So peaceful, silent night. There was something about taking this trip across the sea that didn't have Jesus worried, as if he said, "Don't worry about your life," and then took himself seriously. But the disciples didn't get the memo. If you grew up in church, you've heard at some point that in the Bible, the sea is often imagery for chaos, uncertainty. And so I always find it a little funny, I guess, that Jesus chose sea-fearing fishermen as part of his crew, as if the ability to navigate storms that most choose to stay on the land away from is essential to being a part of Jesus' squad. The sea in reference here is the Sea of Galilee, and plays an important role in Mark's telling of the Jesus story. Scholar of Mark's Gospel, Elizabeth Struthers Malbon, states the Sea of Galilee is the geographical focal point for the first half of the Gospel of Mark. It's the center of Jesus' movement in space. It's like the magical wardrobe in the spare room, or it's like platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station, or it's like a poke gym. Help me out here. And like a poke gym, there's two sides that meet in the sea. There's the Jewish side of the sea, and there's the Gentile side. And you see, when Jesus and his disciples move from the western bank to the eastern shore, they are moving beyond their home turf, outside their cultural comfort zone. Dr. Malvin notes, when Jesus asks his disciples to cross the lake, he's asking them, quote, to move out to others, to move beyond their own religious tradition. That's to say, Jesus is asking them to displace themselves. When Jesus calls us, it's not only to step into the sea of uncertainty, but to sail across the lake into a territory that is, in a word, foreign, unfamiliar. And leaving the sure shores of certitude for the places and spaces of unfamiliarity tends to create the very kind of uncertainty that we try to reduce and avoid. And that's uncomfortable. But it's also deeply good. From the shores, the other side of the sea always looks a little distant, doesn't it? Blurry. It's so easy to write the other side off as small, inconsequential, easy to dismiss. But to leave our place, our comfort, and walk along another shores, it's there that we learn the truth of who the other is, and in reality, the truth of who we are, because only encounter breeds the possibility of change. So how do we do that? I think Mark gives us a hint in verse 36, directly after Jesus' instruction to cross to the other side. Mark, the narrator, tells us that they left the crowd. I submit to you that you will never effectively cross into another's world until you leave behind the voice and the opinion of the crowd. Why? Because the crowd at very best is fickle. It was the crowd, mind you, that one day said, Hosanna, and the other day, the very next day, said, crucify him. At worst, the crowd is not capable of processing someone else's perspective. The crowd collectively seeks only its own consonance. That's why in Luke 4 at the temple, when Jesus suggests God shows compassion outside of this group here, it was the crowd in attendance that decided to respond by trying to throw him off the cliff. Not able to tolerate the imbalance to their own collective conscience. The crowd always seeks a scapegoat. It's usually an innocent bystander at the margins of the crowd's collective identity and power that can carry the transgression of the disruption that the crowd's experiencing. It's creating their dissonance. This decided deference of the crowd's discomfort onto an innocent other is what drove Christian philosopher Soren Kierkegaard to say that the crowd is untruth. Not that just the crowd thinks untruth thoughts or sometimes acts in an untruth sort of ish way, but the crowd is anti-truth. Our discovery of truth, of beauty, of life exists only when we escape the numbing sound of the crowd. But lest you think that I'm simply saying step out from that which you grew up hearing, turn your back on what professors teach or pastors preach, this isn't about some tired college rebellion cliche. This is about you learning to hear the voice of truth amidst the deafening roar of the concerted crowd. And more clearly hear that voice than tuned to the white noise whisper of its unchecked assumptions and beliefs. It's in cultivating our heart to attend to the voice of truth rather than absorbing into the audience of whatever crowd you find yourself around that we begin to become people of faith. You see, too often we mistake being people of faith with being people of certainty. The two are not equal. In a recent blog post, pastor and author Brian Zahn, who often writes about the crowd, wrote this. He said, "Certitude is a poor substitute for authentic faith, but certitude is popular. It's popular because it's easy. No wrestling with doubt, no dark night of the soul, no costly agonizing over the matter, no testing yourself with hard questions. Just accept a second-hand assumption or a majority opinion or a popular sentiment as the final word and settle into certainty." He contrasts this with real faith. Real faith, Zahn says, will cost you. It's real faith that gets into the boat. If we mistake the comfort of certainty with the peace that real faith brings, we will find our solace not in the harbor of truth, but the shoals of the crowd. And the crowd always seeks to divide. The comfort given to those within the crowd is not true comfort. Not at all. It's a consignment of one's conscience, a rending from heart and mind. This is why I think the crowd is the enemy to discipleship and the antithesis of true community. It offers a false peace and proclaims that if my perspective is undisrupted, I must be doing God's work. We can never become people of faith from within the crowd, and thus we must set sail. Yet setting sail ensures we'll encounter a few storms. I've said very little about the storms thus far. That's because no storm comes with an instruction manual. It's like Pastor Jonathan Martin says, people try to offer us an explanation. God offers us the Eucharist. This is my body broken for you. In me you have peace. In the world, there'll be storms. But be encouraged. I've overcome the world. I've silenced the storms. It's the storms in our life that shape us and stretch our faith in a God to whom the wind and the seas obey. You know, James says that those who doubt are like a wave tossed at sea, but I'd add it's only those who are on sea that know their boat floats. So I have to ask, where is there a lake in your life? What waters have kept you at bay in comfort? If they're not here now, the storms of life will come. But the character of the kingdom, that is the resilience forged to carry out God's will in this world, it's not established by those who wait on crowded shores. It's as the poet declares in Psalm 86, "Teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart that I may fear your name." To learn the Lord's ways, we must rely on God's faithfulness. We must know that the one to whom the winds obey is the one who is willing to get in the boat with us. Our faith declares God's faithfulness. Why fear the winds when the winds fear him? You know, Mark doesn't cover the details of Peter's walking on the water. Matthew does in Matthew 14. But we know from the synoptic timeline that it was another Sea of Galilee crossing, not too long after this one. This time, Jesus sends the disciples on their way without him in the boat. And it was another storm with just as raging winds, just as tall of waves about to swamp their boat. And I imagine that the disciples thought, this feels familiar. We've been here before. And so maybe that was why when they saw this faint and dim, ghostly figure in the distance, Peter looked and said, "Is that you? If it's you, I'm serious. If it's you, tell me to get out of this boat." As Jesus walked, the storm still raging, mind you, towards the boat, and Peter got out. You know the story. He took a step, took another step, then he began to sink. Faith doesn't guarantee our certainty of success. Once we've slipped into that, we start looking for certainty, not the true comfort that faith provides. But Jesus didn't ask us to be certain about our ability to walk. He asked us to look to him, and he called us to take a step. Whether you're just beginning to dock in Biola's harbor or you're pulling up anchor and ready to set sail, you'll encounter storms of uncertainty. It's too often that our instinct in response to this is to listen to the loudest voice, the choir of the crowd, to recoil back into familiarity. Before you do, I want you to pause and wonder, am I being called back into familiarity? Or am I being beckoned out to sea? What might be there awaiting? Whether you're moored by uncertainty, doubt, or the fear of failure, remember the one whom the wind and sea obey is the one who calls us to set sail.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.